Good morning, dear students. Let us continue from where we had stopped in the offline classes. Um, this part was done during the online classes. I'm repeating it especially for the 10-5 students who had missed out a bit in the sense that they were lagging behind compared to the other classes. So I want you to please have your books open to this particular line uh, when Lorenzo and Salerio had reached Belmont and they were in conversation with Portia and Bassanio, and along with both of them there was the other character called Graciano. And if you remember, for class 10-5 especially, we had stopped at that particular line when Lorenzo thanked his honor, he meant to say, to Bassanio for having welcomed them very warmly to Belmont. For my part, my lord, my purpose was not to have seen you here, but meeting with Salerio. By the way, he did entreat me past all sayings, nay, to come with him along. Meaning to say, he first thanked Bassanio for having welcomed them to Belmont, especially him to Belmont, and his wife Jessica to Belmont. And then he went on to say, as far as he was concerned, he had no purpose, no plan, no reason to come and meet him in Belmont. But on the way, when he had met Salerio, Salerio had requested him and pressed on him to accompany him to Belmont. And he was unable to deny his requests. Therefore, he had come along with him, accompanying him to Belmont. He said clearly that he could not deny his request, he could not say no to him. That is why he had come along with him, accompanied him to Belmont. Otherwise, he had no plans, no reasons, and no purpose to have come and met him there. Salerio went on to speak and said, I did, my lord, and I have reason for it. Signor Antonio commends him to you. Meaning to say, Salerio agreed that he had certainly insisted on Lorenzo. He had certainly pressed him to come along with him and accompany him to Belmont, and that was a fact. And he said he had a very good reason for doing so and for having come to Belmont. He said the fact and reason was that Mr. Antonio or Signor Antonio had sent him there with his greetings, with Antonio's greetings in the form of a letter to be delivered to Bassanio by Salerio, and he handed the letter that he needed to deliver that had been sent through him by Antonio to Bassanio. Commends, meaning in this case, was sending his greetings. Antonio had sent his greetings through Salerio to Bassanio. And that is the purpose he was there for, to deliver Antonio's letter to Bassanio. And Bassanio said, ere I ope his letter, I pray you tell me how my good friend doth. And he said, ere means before I hope he could open, he said, the letter that he had received and he was holding in his hand. I pray you, he was requesting Salerio to kindly tell him how his good friend Antonio was back in Belmont. Then Salerio, in reply, said to Bassanio, "Not sick, my lord, unless it be in mind, nor well unless in mind. His letter there will show you his estate," he said, addressing Bassanio as his lord with respect. He said that Antonio was not sick in the physical form in his body, though he might be mentally very unhappy, worried, and anxious. Therefore, one could safely say that he was not completely well. That is the meaning of the first two lines. And then he went on to say that the letter which he had sent to him and the letter which Bassanio was holding in his hand at that moment would inform him regarding Antonio's state and condition back in Venice. Do you understand? Estate means his condition, his physical condition, as well as his financial condition back in Venice. The letter would reveal to him or tell him exactly how Antonio was financially and physically in Venice. And Graciano then spoke and said, "Nerissa, cheer yon stranger, bid her welcome. Your hand, Salerio, what's the news from Venice?" And Graciano asked Nerissa, the woman who was in love with him and was willing to marry him, he asked Nerissa. Nerissa was to be his wife soon. He asked her to welcome Jessica, Lorenzo's wife, and make her feel at home, cheer her up, make her comfortable, welcome her to Belmont. Then he extended his arm to Salerio in order to greet him and shake his hand. And whilst he did so, he asked Salerio to know what other news had he got with him from Venice. He went on to speak and say next, how though that royal merchant good Antonio, he questioned. He asked Salerio regarding Antonio, and he called him a royal merchant. He asked him how was that very kind in attitude and in action. He called Antonio a very kind and compassionate, always ready to help others, and he also called Antonio a good merchant. So he wanted to know from Salerio how was this good, kind merchant Antonio keeping back in Venice. I know he will be glad of our success. And he said his good friend, their good friend Antonio, would certainly be very glad and happy when he would learn about their success in Belmont, Bassanio having made the right choice and winning Portia's heart and hand in marriage, and he having found a woman to love him and willing to marry him. And then he went on to say, with regards to their success in Belmont, the purpose regarding which they had come, the purpose for which they had come, he said next that they are the Jasons, we have won the fleece. And he said they were as brave and as successful as the Greek hero Jason had been way back during the Greek classical stories. This Jason was a character from the Greek legends. Legends are stories which were very popular, but it need not have been true. This Jason was a character from one of the Greek legends, and he had ventured to a place, to a kingdom called Kolkos on the east coast of the Black Sea. He had crossed the rough and destructive oceans and seas along with his companions, supporters and friends, the Argonauts, 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 and accompanied by his wife, Medea. His wife, Medea, was believed to have magical powers, and with their help, the help of his wife and the Argonauts, he was able to kill the fire-spitting dragon that guarded the golden fleece that had been tied around the trunk of an oak tree on a hilltop by the ruler of Kolkos. Many a person had come, many brave men had come in the hope to retrieve retrieve means to obtain, to get the golden fleece. But none had been successful except for this Greek brave, courageous hero called Jason. Graciano makes a reference to Jason in order to prove that they had been as brave, as lucky, and as courageous as Jason had been. He and Bassanio had been as successful as Jason had been in the Greek legends. And as Jason had retrieved, obtained successfully, slaying and killing the fire-spitting, fearful dragon, overcoming the others who had come or paid their visits to Kolkos, wanting to get the golden fleece, but all were not successful except for Jason. He, Graciano, said that he and Bassanio and he had been as successful as Jason had been, and they had obtained the golden fleece like Jason had obtained in Colcos. Salerio spoke up and said to Graciano, I would you had won the fleece that he hath lost. He meant to say that Antonio would certainly have been happy if they had helped him to gain back his gold and money, make arrangements for the gold and money that he had lost, and help him out of the clutches of this wicked man called Shylock, then they would have been as brave, as courageous, and as successful as the Greek hero Jason had been. And Portius said, observing Bassanio reading the letter that he had received from Antonio, she had noticed that his expressions had changed very dramatically and very abruptly or suddenly. She had noticed that a while ago he was all cheerful and happy. Whilst reading that letter, his face had grown very grave, and the color of his face had faded and grown pale. She went on to speak and said, there are some shrewd contents in yon same paper that steals the color from Bassanio's cheek, she said. Meaning to say, she said that the letter he was reading, the piece of paper in his hand which he was reading from, contained some unpleasant, bad and sad news. Yon means in that paper. And this bad, sad and unpleasant news seemed to have stolen the cheerfulness, the color of his face, and made his face grow pale and wan, W-A-N, wan, made him grow nervous, had shaken him up in his confidence. And she said next, it definitely must contain, or it definitely had the mention of nothing else except the news of a dear friend's death that could have shaken the confidence, made him grow so nervous that he was feeling at that point of time. Again, I repeat, she said that the letter must be containing the news of a close friend's death, for nothing else in the world could have made him grow that nervous, shake his confidence the way it had shaken at that moment, and nothing could have caused him to grow pale and worried as he was at that moment, for he was a very brave, strong man, both brave in his actions and very strong mentally. So she said nothing else except the news of some close friend's death could have shaken his confidence, could have made him grow that nervous which he was at that moment, as he was a man who was mentally very strong. And then she went on to say that his condition, his nervousness, his anxiousness, and his inconfidence was getting worse and worse with each passing minute. That is the meaning of what worse and worse. His expressions was getting more and more graver. He was getting more and more nervous and filled with anxiety or anxiousness. With leave, Bassanio, and she asked him for his permission. With leave, Bassanio, with leave means she asked him for his permission to allow her know freely without being stopped half of what was contained in that letter which he was reading. And what did she exactly say? With leave, Bassanio, I am half yourself. She said that at that point of time, she was going to be married to him. Therefore, it could be considered as a fact that she was his wife, and being his wife and in love with him, she had the right to have half of everything which he possessed or had. So, following this, the right to have half of what he possessed or had, and being his better half, she must have freely, without being stopped, without being objected, without being prevented, know half of the message that the letter which Bassanio was reading contained. Then Bassanio went on to answer and speak, replying to Portia, "Oh, sweet Portia," he said, he used the word sweet with respect and affection for her. Here are a few of the unpleasantest words that ever blotted paper. And he said that the letter which he was reading, the paper which he was reading from, contained some of the saddest words, some of the most melancholic words, melancholic, melancholic words that a man had ever written on a sheet of paper, blotting it, smearing it, smudging it, marking it and staining it with ink. Again I repeat, he said that paper contained some of the saddest words that had ever been written by any man on a sheet of paper using ink, blotting the paper, smudging, smudging, smudging it, smearing, smearing, smearing it, staining, staining, staining it with ink. Then he went on to say, calling Portia as gentle lady, with respect, when I did first impart my love to you, I freely told you all the wealth I had ran in my vein. And he said, when for the first time he had expressed his love for her, when for the first time he had proposed his love for her, when for the first time he had confessed his love for her, it was at that point of time he had told her very frankly regarding the wealth that he had. He had said to her very truthfully and frankly that all the wealth that he had was not something that he had earned through his hard work. He had gained all that wealth as a part of his inheritance because he was born in a rich, royal, aristocratic family. Again, I repeat, he said that he had told her the truth regarding all the wealth that he had was not something that he had earned through his hard work. Instead, he had inherited all that wealth because of his high royal birth. He was born to a rich family, and because of his high birth, being a gentleman as he was, he had inherited all that wealth. And then he went on to say that, and then I told you true. He said that he had in fact told her the truth about his financial position and status. And yet, dear lady, rating myself at nothing, you shall see how much I was a braggart. Meaning to say that despite he having told her the truth about his financial position and regarding his wealth, that he had inherited all that, he had overrated his position. He had overvalued his financial status, and he had overrated or overvalued his worth as a person. And he said that in doing so, he had proved himself to be immature, to have acted in that boastful manner, taking pride of telling her that he was a wealthy man, and that he had been foolish and acted proud, exaggerating, exaggerating about his financial position. In other words, he meant to say that he had overrated himself and his financial position, and he had told her the truth, but it had been half the truth. The fact was that he was in a very weak financial position then, and he should have told her the fact, and the fact was that he was not only in a very weak financial position, but his financial position was much below being weak or poor. His financial condition was worse than being poor. He was penniless, without any money. He was as good as a pauper. Pauper. Pauper means a man without any money at all. And that is what he should have said to her. Instead, he had told her that his financial status had not been sound, or that his financial status was weak. And then he went on to say, for the fact was that he had he had bound himself to a dear friend who he was implying to be, or he was directly talking about. He said that his financial position being worse than weak, that he had no money at all and he was as good as a pauper. He had engaged himself to a very close and dear friend, Antonio, and in turn he had got his friend bound to his arch enemy, arch enemy, Shylock. He had got his good friend in turn trapped into Shylock's snare. Snare. Snare means a trap that is set usually to get a person, to trap a person. And all that he had done to help him feed my means, so that he could have the money supplied to him which Antonio did borrow from Shylock and had it given to him, so that he could use the money to undertake the voyage to Belmont in order to take part in the lottery of caskets and win Portia's heart. To feed my means to support him and his voyage to Belmont. Here is a letter, lady. The paper as the body of my friend, and every word in it a gaping wound, issuing life blood. And he said, showing the letter to Portia, the paper to Portia, and he said, next, there was the letter in his hand, and he said that paper that he was holding was like the physical body of Antonio, his close friend, in his arms, and every word, every sad and painful word mentioned in that letter were like open injury marks on the body of Antonio, from these open wounds was oozing, oozing, oozing or pouring out life blood, expressing his pain and suffering. Then he went on to say, but is it true? He asked Salerio. Was it true? He wanted to know from Salerio. Hath all his ventures failed? He questioned to know, had not one of Antonio's ships that had sailed out to different lands to do business had returned with profits? Had all his ventures, had all his ships, all his investments failed? Had not one hit? What? Not one hit. What? Not one hit? Meaning, he questioned to know, had not one of his ships returned successfully from their respective voyages with profits? And he went on to question to know from Salerio, had not the ship from Tripolis returned successfully? Had not the ship from Mexico returned successfully? Had not the ship that had sailed to England returned successfully? Had not the ship that had sailed to Portugal, Lisbon, returned successfully? Had not the ship that had sailed to Barbary returned successfully? And I told you in class, Barbary today in the modern world comprises 4 important countries of North Africa. They are Algeria, Tunis, Tripoli, and Libya. I repeat, Algeria, Tunis, Tripoli, and Libya. So he questioned to know, had not the ship that had ventured to gone out to Barbary had returned? Had not the ship that had been to India returned successfully with profits? And not one vessel escaped the dreadful touch of merchant marring rocks? He questioned to know. He asked Salerio, had not one of his ships escaped collision, 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 hitting against these destructive and dangerous, that is the meaning of dreadful rocks, dreadful collision, this fearful destructive collision against the merchant marring rocks. Merchant marring means these dreadful, dangerous, destructive rocks which hit against, which collided against the ships of merchants, wrecking them, drowning them, and ruining the merchants financially. So merchant marring rocks means rocks that wrecked merchant ships, destroying them, sinking them, and causing huge losses to merchants as far as their finances were concerned. So he questioned to know, had not one of his ships escaped colliding against those dangerous, destructive and dreadful collision against those huge merchant ruining rocks out at sea? And Salerio replied and said, not one, my lord. Besides, it should appear that if he had the present money to discharge the Jew, he would not take it. He said in reply that none of Antonio's ships had returned successfully from their respective voyages. And apart from that, he said, besides, apart from that, it seemed from the attitude of Shylock that he was not ready to accept, even if Antonio had with him the required sum of 3,000 ducats at that present moment, using which he could repay back and clear his loan. Discharge means repay back his debt and clear the loan. It seemed that Shylock was not ready or was not going to accept the money, even if Antonio had the money available with him and was willing, ready to clear his debt. Discharge means pay and clear his debt. So he went on to say next, Salerio was informing Bassanio regarding the difficulties which Antonio seemed to be in. Never did I know a creature that did bear the shape of man. And he said he had never known, he had never seen such a wicked creature, a monster living in the form of a man, living in the form of a human being, taking the form of a human being in the body of a human being. Again, he said he had never known of a wicked monster or a creature to be in the form or a body of a man as Shylock was. In other words, he was implying or indirectly saying that Shylock was a wicked, malicious, and cruel monster in the body of a man, in the shape of a human being. And he said that he had never seen such a wicked man as Shylock was. So keen and greedy to confound a man, and he said that Shylock in his wickedness was so very bent, keen and very interested and highly greedy. For what purpose? He was very sharply bent. He was not willing to change his mind, and he was highly greedy to destroy a man. And who is this man? Confound means destroy a man, and this man he is referring to is Antonio. He said that this wicked Shylock, a monster-like man, a monster living in the body of a man, was so very interested and highly greedy to destroy a kind and good man as Antonio. And he said that Shylock was he piles the duke at morning and at night, and doth impeach the freedom of the state if they deny him justice. And he said he was urging the duke every morning and every night, and he was urging the duke to have his case heard in court and grant him justice. And he was willing to challenge. He was willing to blame. Impeach means he was willing to challenge. He was willing to blame. He was willing to accuse. accuse, accuse. He was willing to question the integrity, the honesty, and the honor of the state of Venice, the judiciary, the court, and the law, if they would deny to hear his case and grant him justice in court. Then he went on to say, Salerio went on to inform Bassanio, 20 merchants, the Duke himself, and the magnificios of greatest port have all persuaded with him. He said that 20 important merchants of Venice who were highly respectable in the Rialto, the stock exchange, the hub of business and trade in Venice, these 20 rich and influential merchants, the Duke himself, the man holding the highest position in the administration of Venice, he himself, along with the magnificios, the noblemen of Venice town or city, who held the noblemen who held the highest ranks and positions in society. That is the meaning of the magnificios of greatest port, holding the highest ranks and position in the immediate society of Venice. They had all together tried to reason, explain, and help Shylock to change his mind and give up on his demand. Persuade means, gentlemen, reason, tried to show him that he was being merciless, tried to persuade him, tried to influence him, tried to reason with him, tried to explain and convince